Hi. I'm Rachel Leingang. I'm a democracy reporter at The Guardian.
And I'm Rachel as well. Rachel Myrow, KQED's senior editor of our Silicon Valley desk. And we have coming up with us tonight to have this fabulous conversation, Jonathan Mehta Stein, who is the executive director of the nonprofit California Common Cause and co-founder and board chair of the California Initiative for Technology and Democracy, aka CITED.
We also have Sneha Ravenor, and she is the founder and president of Encode Justice. Born and raised in the heart of Silicon Valley, the Stanford student was a summer fellow at the Center for AI and Digital Policy. Also, she can boast that she was the youngest participant invited to meet with Vice President Harris on a White House roundtable about AI.
Last but not least, Senator Scott Wiener of San Francisco, the author of the most contentious AI bill of this legislative year, currently sitting on Governor Gavin Newsom's desk, which Silicon Valley lobbyists are trying to kill as we sit here and chit-chat tonight. Well, we thought we might start first by defining what deepfakes are, and Jonathan has kindly offered to define it for us.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. For anyone who doesn't know, generative AI is any software system that can take a human prompt, literally a written sentence that you type into an online portal, for example, and can produce for you digital media, photo, video, audio, or text that is what you ask it to be. And so, for example, there was a viral image of the Pope wearing a puffy jacket. The Pope never wore that jacket, but it looked awesome. A generative AI tool made that deepfake of the Pope, and it was shared on social media. People loved it. That's a good example of how a generative AI deepfake can be fun, silly. There was another example in which there was generative AI deepfake photos of an attack on the US Pentagon uplifted on social media by Russian intelligence entities and Russian media that caused a massive dip in the US stock market because very briefly investors and the country thought that the Pentagon was under attack when in fact it was because of only a fake photo generated by AI. So a deepfake is a fake image, video, or whatever of a person or a scene or a situation that can and often is meant to deceive.
We're going to start off with some examples of deepfakes so that you all can kind of get in that mindset of how easy they can be to make. So at the early part of this year, I created on my phone essentially in 2 minutes a bunch of audio deepfakes and made a quiz with some real audio clips, both of Trump and Biden, to show readers that it can be pretty hard to distinguish when things are real or fake. So we're gonna go through a few of the clips and ask you all if you think they're real or fake. So we can start with the first clip.
How in the hell dare he raise that? Frankly, when I was asked the question, I thought to myself, it wasn't any of their damn business.
Okay, by show of hands, do you think that was real? Or anybody think it was fake? Okay, that was a real one. They get a little harder from here, so let's try the second one.
She stroked his pretty skin again and kissed him and held him tight. But instead of saying thank you, that snake gave her a vicious bite.
Okay, real? Anyone think it's real? Okay, who thinks it's fake? That's real. Yeah.
That one shocked me too.
Yes.
That fooled us in rehearsal also.
Yeah, totally.
Yep. And he actually reads that poem like not infrequently, so watch a Trump rally. Let's try the third one.
No, you haven't. You're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. You said you were, but you're now you got to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you.
Okay, who thinks that's real? Who thinks fake? That's real. Gotcha. All right, let's try the fourth one.
My granddad always used to say, "You're short on ears and long on mouth."
Okay, real? Fake? That's a fake one, so. And this will be the final one.
They came after me because I was too good at being president. I did too much for you. I fought too hard. I fixed the economy. We were all rich. And then they came after me.
Okay, real? Fake? That's a fake one. Yeah, so especially in audio, this is very difficult to tell. Super easy to make, really easy to trick people. So yeah, so I think that was a great way to show what a deepfake is. So to launch into our conversation, though, there's still this gulf between what generative AI can do and what it could do. And really, people are afraid of being tricked. They're afraid of what the potential is there. And that's created a doubt in people's mind about whether everything they see is even real. This idea that even real images could be called deepfakes. It's hard to tell. How do you navigate voter trust in this kind of an environment? We can start with you, Jonathan.
Sure. So thank you for those examples. I mean, by the end, it felt like everyone was just kind of like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. And that's the danger, I think, is that we reach a point where there's so much fake content and there's so much allegedly fake content that people start not knowing how to react to what their eyes and ears are intaking, right? And it leads to mass confusion. I think that there's, for me at least, there's three primary concerns. The first is deception. So a situation where you actually have a deepfake on the eve of Election Day. Kamala Harris rolls out her new position. She's anti-puppies all of a sudden, and it's the Monday before election. There's not enough time for the press to correct the record, and 10,000 people in Wisconsin believe it, and that's enough to flip Wisconsin, right? I think that's the nightmare scenario. Deception. I mean, that you don't need a deepfake to be super, super realistic for 10,000 people to believe it. In some swing states, that may make the difference. The second concern is disengagement, which is that even if people don't necessarily believe the deepfake content or they're suspicious of the deepfake content, it contributes to a sense that politics is messy, that everything is broken, and that they just disengage from the political process. They just basically say, this isn't worth my time anymore. I was on the edge already, and now it's just definitely not worth my time. And so the danger is not 10,000 voters in Wisconsin flip their vote, but that 10 million people don't vote at all because they're so disillusioned and disengaged from the political process. And the last is tribalism. The idea that in an environment in which we don't know what we can trust, many people will begin to trust whatever reaffirms their pre-existing beliefs, and they will reject as false anything that challenges those beliefs. And I think that it's a really, really dangerous moment, kind of on the precipice of truth. And I say all of that to conclude by saying that I don't think hope is lost. I actually think that there's a lot that we can do in terms of how we consume information and in terms of state action to protect our democracy. There's a lot we can do that's possible, but first we have to fully understand the scale and the scope of the danger in front of us.
Yeah, totally. So I'll start with some good news, which is that based on what we've seen so far, I don't think that we've seen, at least in this election or this cycle, AI moving the electoral needle too significantly, right? Obviously, knock on wood, that remains to be the case. We've seen some warning signs, obviously. We mentioned the robocalls featuring President Biden's voice. Just last week, the Department of Justice shut down a Russian covert influence operation trying to influence voters and undermine support for Ukraine. We just saw Taylor Swift cite deepfakes in her endorsement of Vice President Kamala Harris. I mean, those obviously indicate that the risks here are very much not imaginary and they're very real, and people are taking notice even before the risks are fully realized. But we are up against this broader crisis of public trust. And actually, I think earlier today I saw a poll showing that the vast majority of Americans at this point don't believe election information coming from AI sources, which means that message has been communicated to the public. So now, how do we fight back? How do we take this back into our hands? And what are the small and quick things that we can do as voters and as people to kind of fight back and to help rebuild trust? I think first of all, obviously, if you're seeing something online, any image or video that could be sensational or scandalous, you always want to double check with some mainstream news source to see if that can be confirmed or denied as being AI generated, right? And that, obviously we're seeing that left and right, and there are ways for us to double check the information that we're seeing before we just blindly accept whatever might validate our existing political biases as true or as real. So that's obviously the first thing. The second thing is, I think that community-based fact checking is really, really important. It's really democratic and it's really effective as well. So community notes on X, for example, it's obviously far from perfect, but it's already done a great job of helping us flag some AI-generated content across the board. I think people have this distaste for any sort of centralized, authoritative ministry of truth or single arbiter of what's real and what's fake. But I think people actually buy into this idea of helping each other break through the noise. And so I think that's also a big step forward. And obviously, Jonathan talked about the importance of government action as well in helping combat that threat. So I think there are basic ways that we can become more conscious consumers of information and also help each other become more thoughtful consumers of information.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that in this election, it's not going to be so advanced that it'll swamp everything else. But I do think we're going to see some real issues in this election. And I can speak from the perspective of a candidate where people say all sorts of things about you, and I already see online you can make a whole library of like fake photos of me. I have, for example, just a very simple one. A few years ago, there was actually I think it was a KQED event at the main library, like the Night of Ideas. I think that was a KQED event. And so I was there and I took a book and I just held it and I posted it online with me holding this book. And so since then there's a whole series they just changed the title of the book and into all sorts of horrible things. And that's like a very minor kind of fake photo. But if you don't know any better, it looks totally real. And you'd be like, God, that guy was disgusting that he would hold a book saying that. And I've had other fake photos posted of me. And then I just try to envision as a candidate photos that are much more sophisticated. And also the voice thing really freaks me out the most. It'd be like, oh, this is a voicemail we got that Scott Wiener left someone. And I think we will see some of that this election because as we heard, it's already here and it will be used. And the other thing about AI is that it allows pre-existing bad behavior to be just profoundly more efficient. And so whether, makes it more efficient for you to create a chemical weapon or whether it makes it more efficient for you instead of like in 2016 when we had the Russian bot farms that were just posting comments and posting things about Hillary Clinton to try to get Donald Trump elected. Now you don't even need to recruit those people anymore. You can just start having AI generated content on social media, and there'll be a constant game of cat and mouse to try to shut that down, and it'll be just so much more efficient than before. But the other thing that I'll say is I think one thing that we'll see is there will be just more of a premium on reliable sources. And so instead of just relying on just free random links that you find on a search engine, perhaps people will value more actual publications that you have a subscription to that we know are not fake, or people will be perhaps more careful about who they're following on social media for information and just more meticulous about that because it is and I agree with Jonathan, as big a risk of people being tricked with fake information it's that it'll just take a wrecking ball to people's confidence, and people can so easily just start assuming that everything is fake, and so that's why those reliable sources and accounts are going to be at a premium.
What regulation, if any, protects the voter at the federal level, at the state level right now for this election season? Because as we just learned with that quiz, even smart, educated, with it people can totally get conned by this stuff. Senator, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, Jonathan probably knows more about the precise details here. I mean, there are rules now about like if you're engaged in electioneering and I mean, well, you can lie in an election, and people do it all the time and always have. But if you're, I think, but there are limits. For example, there are rules around like false endorsements. If I advertise that, such and such organ that Planned Parenthood endorsed me, and if they didn't endorse me, there are things that you can do. But it's also extremely hard because once someone has put something out there, just figuring out who did it, the enforcement is so incredibly difficult. So it's possible, but it's hard. And the social media platforms, there's one X that doesn't even try. And the other
Telegram
ones
too, yeah.
and the other ones, I think make some effort, but it's not where it needs to be.
Yeah. So, sorry. Go ahead, Jonathan. Absolutely. No, I was going to say there are so many democracy-focused bills in California that Jonathan is the expert on, and obviously, I think he can go ahead and speak to those. If I may, I think there's also a larger conversation here about the fact that we have a lot of power over our shared futures. It's vested in the hands of a couple of AI companies that basically have no guardrails to keep the public safe whatsoever, right? And I'm not just bringing it up because it's the elephant in the room and because I have the visionary behind all of it right next to me, but there's this bill right now here in California, SB 1047, right now is a critical battle stretch. It's on Governor Newsom's desk. And what it would do is basically hold the largest AI companies accountable if they don't take basic measures to ensure their products can't cause catastrophic harms, like creating a chemical weapon or causing damage to critical infrastructure. These really, really massive, large-scale harms that current AI systems aren't capable of, but future systems could very well be capable of. I mean, earlier this morning, we saw OpenAI release GPT-01, which is, its most advanced model yet, capable of complex reasoning. And, obviously we're seeing how, you can look at the scorecard for the model, and it's, upgraded to medium risk for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear weapons, and for persuasion. So these systems are getting more and more advanced, and I think that whether we're talking about AI harms in the context of elections or just more broadly, I think why this bill in particular is so important is because we've seen the tech lobby come out in full force against it. They're spreading lies every single day about what the bill can and can't do. They're fear-mongering about how it's going to gut open source innovation and destroy startups. All of those things are obviously just not true. And if passed, this bill would be the most consequential law anywhere in the world for the next generation of AI systems, and would really, really signal, I think, to tech companies that they're finally being held to account for the impacts their products have on the public. And so obviously just commending Senator Wiener for his leadership there, and also highlighting that as a bill that we're all thinking about right now. And obviously, if you have a moment to go, call up Governor Newsom, let him know that you want that bill to be signed into law. The ball is in his court now. It's really, really, really important that we get this passed, because I think it'll really help us get the ball rolling for future AI legislation as well across the board.
So in terms of laws and regulations that protect against AI disinformation in our elections, the first thing that needs to be said is there's nothing at the federal level. And there's reasonable legislation that's been introduced at the federal level. It has no chance of passing. People that work in Congress and around Congress will tell you none of it has a chance of passing. There are states that are now passing anti-deepfake laws that are all modeled after the California law that was passed in 2019. So that California law was authored by Assemblymember Mark Berman, basically says that for a short window immediately before Election Day, deepfakes of candidates are not permitted. Deepfakes meaning a certain description or as specified. And the entity that is liable, or that you would bring an enforcement action against, is the individual poster of the deepfake. Now that creates obvious problems, and I'm articulating this because this is the model that other states are now passing. It has obvious problems. First and foremost is it only protects candidates, right? So if we're talking about the credibility of our elections, I think we need to extend protections to elections officials and poll workers. If you have a deepfake of your county elections official on the weekend before Election Day announcing in a video that voting locations have changed, that's very, very dangerous. Or a county elections office or a poll worker caught on tape saying that their voting machines can be hacked or vote-by-mail ballots aren't secure, or whatever it is that confirms the most recent big lie conspiracy theory about our elections being rigged. Those are just as dangerous. The bill doesn't include those. The locus of enforcement is problematic in the sense that if a deepfake is posted, if I post a deepfake and someone wants to bring an enforcement action to take it down, they have to sue me personally. I could be anonymous, I could live in another country, or by the time you do bring an enforcement action against me, it could be months. And the viral life cycle of my original deepfake post is over and no one cares about it any longer. I can criticize that bill, and I can name Mark Berman in the process because Assemblymember Mark Berman is part of our bill package to improve on that and to bring forward better, more nuanced legislation. So we created the California Initiative for Technology and Democracy to level up California's expertise on the digital threats that confront our democracy and to help Sacramento lead the domestic response because Congress is not doing anything. And one of the bills in our bill package is a bill by Assemblymember Mark Berman that attempts to take a better, smarter, more nuanced approach to exactly this problem.
We got a lot of problems, so maybe we'll get some good information here so we can all sleep at night. A lot of the AI-produced content these days, it looks like obviously fake. And I'm thinking in recent days of AI-generated images that showed Donald Trump carrying around cats because of the latest round of election disinformation. Maybe those of us in the media are not giving the general public enough credit here. Like maybe they're better able every day to spot fake information, or these, AI-generated images are more to be seen as like memes that kind of advance narratives, but not necessarily trick people. Is there any hope in this? Can we sleep at night, or is this something that we really need to be, pretty concerned about?
I think we need to be concerned. I mean, there's some things that are just funny and kooky, like the Pope in the puffy jacket, but with I think there's a generational thing here. I think younger people are probably more likely to be able to be like, oh, that's clearly like a joke meme, or at least be skeptical. When I think of like the people who are most likely to vote, who are older, and I think of say my parents, and something comes across it would be Facebook, most likely, Facebook feed. I don't know that people who are not younger, more technologically sophisticated will be as prone to believing that that's fake, that's clearly made up. Maybe eventually, but I think I think there are still big swaths of the population that will see stuff and just share it and not question it.
So, right. I mean, I think that's right. I have an example from my life where a member of my family on my in-law side shared a video. Someone who consumes a lot of conservative pro-Trump content on YouTube and other sites shared a video with me in seriousness that was Barack Obama's personal life revealed. And it was a deepfake video of Barack Obama kissing white women in bikinis. And it was clearly fake, but he believed that it was true and shared it with me as if it was true, as if, see, this is what I've been saying about Barack Obama all along. Okay, so I do think, to your point, Rachel, that there is content that most people are not going to think will laugh at. And then there's some percentage of the electorate that is going to believe it. I think the solution is that all of us, starting with the people in this room who are probably the most sophisticated consumers of information and moving on, rippling through the rest of the electorate, all of us need to just stop getting news from social media. That we just need to be relying on real news sources and going directly to those news sources in order to get ourselves educated. So if you find a news source that you trust, whether it's the Washington Post or the AP, the New York Times, or KQED, or your local ethnic media outlet, find the outlet that you trust and get your news directly from that outlet. And I hate to say it, everybody, pay for your news if you have to. Pay for that subscription to your local community newspaper. I have started asking for subscriptions to newspapers as Christmas presents. It's an awesome Christmas present. And I give them to people as Christmas presents. It's an amazing Christmas present. And it begins to shift us away from sources that we can't be sure of. And hopefully, I think that is the simple, I think we are, to your point earlier, we are in a double checking era. We have to Google everything you see to see if it's too good to be true. It's probably too good to be true. Google it and see if it's being confirmed by legitimate news sources, and better yet, just go get your news directly from those legitimate news sources.
Yeah, I know you wanted to sleep at night, so I hate to come in and sound more alarmed, but I think obviously the risk here is that, like I said before, I'm not so much worried about AI upending 2024. I'm worried about, what's going to happen if AI doesn't upend 2024 and we just pronounce that threat to democracy dead before it's actually arrived, right? Because right now, for example, the best tools that we have on hand are still closed source, which means that bad actors are relying on an arsenal that lags 16 to 18 months behind the frontier of the technology. Soon enough, that gap could close and, open source models could catch up, or, what that means is that, we haven't actually seen the worst of it yet. Additionally, I think at this point, the public is generally prepared to, if, for example, if you see a video of Kamala Harris at a rally and it's just obviously doctored footage, you can kind of tell that it's not real because you've probably seen videos of her speaking in the past. And, right now, AI generated videos are pretty primitive compared to images. And soon enough, we have OpenAI sitting on its video generation model Sora and the voice generation model Voice Engine. These are things that are actually cooking inside the labs that we haven't seen yet because they're not releasing out of fear for the election, and they're going to come soon. And so I think that I'm not so much worried about where we are right now, but I think where we will be in 1 or 2 years. And I don't know if the public is as prepared to anticipate those threats as it is to sift through what's obviously fake that they're seeing online right now.
And can I just and what you just said is so important, that they're not releasing these things out of fear for the election, and that is, that's a responsible thing to do, to say. But that raises the bigger question about their releasing models that could impact an election. And I'm not saying they shouldn't release them, but it does really beg the question of, apropos of what we've been working on together, SB 1047 in a different context, about having real guardrails around this technology, not to suppress the technology. That's that's not what I want, but having guardrails. And that's why the public policy is so important, because right now we have these labs that are doing just amazing innovation, and it's just we're trusting them that they're going to do it responsibly and put those guardrails in place. And the reason why we need sometimes laws, as much as the tech sector never wants to be regulated, is that even if, let's say, all the CEOs of all the major labs now are completely dedicated to safety and avoiding these problems, we have no idea if the next CEO will be, or what the Wall Street pressure will be in 5 years. And so that's why it's so important to put smart guardrails in place. And it's hard because the technology is evolving quickly, and you don't want to put laws in place that then handcuff it and are either not relevant in 3 years, so they do nothing, or hamstring good innovation, because AI has so much potential to make the world a better place in many ways. And that's a difficulty of public policy. But whereas the tech sector, some in the tech sector, because there's some who get it, but some will say, because we don't know and it could potentially hamstring, don't do anything. And I think it's really important to try to thread that needle and have a thoughtful approach, because the Wild West is going to be a problem.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? Do you think the companies generally have been acting responsibly thus far?
We don't know, because there's no real transparency. I think that my sense is that they're generally trying, and I know a lot of the folks who are in this world and at these companies, and I think they do. I think they do want to make the world a better place, and they want to create AI that's going to cure cancer and help us solve climate change and lift up people's living standards. And I don't think that they are wanting to throw a lot of people out of work or cause huge damage to infrastructure or overturn free and fair elections. I don't think they want to do that. But I also think that we just don't fully know because we don't. It's private industry, and they tell us what they want to tell us. I will say that there are a lot of people in the AI world who I think really deeply want to do the good thing, do the right thing, and having better transparency, I think, will help.
Well, just before we hand the mic over to audience members, we're going to have a couple of folks walking through the aisles in just a little bit. I did want to ask about a hopeful possibility. We just saw an attempt at using AI on Trump's behalf backfire badly. Sneha, you mentioned earlier Taylor Swift. Perhaps you saw the Instagram post holding one of her cats. She came out for Harris right after the debate and mentioned that part of what impelled her to do so was AI falsely advertising her quote-unquote endorsement of Trump. Swift wrote, "It really conjured up my fears around AI and the dangers of spreading information." So my question for you, and Jonathan, perhaps you want to answer this first. Do you see generative AI as a gun that can fire in both directions, especially in an election, on behalf of one or both presidential candidates?
Yes, I mean, it can backfire, right? Yeah, and I think in that case it has. But I think that what's not mentioned in her Instagram post, but is certainly part of, I would assume, part of her reasoning, is that yes, there were deepfakes of Taylor Swift endorsing Trump. They were not real, and they were used by Trump and his allies to create a perception that Taylor Swift supported him. But you will remember that around the time of the Super Bowl, Taylor Swift was the victim of a horrific set of deepfakes that were depicted non-consensual sexual imagery of Taylor Swift. And it spread all over the internet before they were able to get it cleaned off the internet. And it was just a brutal and humiliating moment in her career and life. And there's other examples in which female politicians in other countries have been targeted in the middle of their campaigns by horrific non-consensual sexual imagery. And that's why, 99% of deepfake porn targets women. And it's being weaponized as a form of sexual violence against women candidates in our democracy. And so when Taylor Swift came out and said, I'm really worried about AI and its power, I think she had in mind the deepfakes of her endorsing Trump. I think she probably also had this other experience. And yes, I do think that, and I think as a roundabout way of answering your question, I think that some of the deepfake content we have seen in pop culture or targeting celebrities has actually helped raise awareness overall. In the Kendrick Lamar-Drake beef, some of you may be aware that Drake put out a song using Tupac's voice to praise Drake and criticize Kendrick Lamar, and the hip hop community was like, "You are so lame. You unearthed Tupac via AI to make him talk positively about you." And it helped educate a bunch of people about the fact that voice generated AI can be used to make anyone you want say anything you want. So there is a way in which, AI use of AI around celebrities is helping to educate. If I can go backwards for just 1 second to your question, Rachel. You said, do the folks in these companies, are they generally trying to do the right thing? And it's really curious to me because tech is kind of the only industry where we ask that question. So when cars didn't have airbags or seatbelts, we didn't say, well, the people who work in automobile manufacturing are good people. Their heart is in the right place. They're trying to serve the world in some way. I'm sure they'll get to safety protections eventually. We regulated it and mandated seatbelts and airbags. In pharmaceuticals, we don't ask if drug manufacturers have their hearts in the right place and if they're going to insist that drugs and medications meet certain safety standards before they're released to market. We regulate it. We use federal oversight to ensure the products are safe for the public. There is this weird norm that we have all accepted as a society in which every industry that impacts our safety, our health, and our well-being receives scrutiny, oversight, testing, inspections, airlines, pharmaceuticals, food growers. But tech is able to release products that are used by millions and millions of people. And now there's data that shows have huge impacts on our wellness, our mental health, teen mental health, and so forth. And any question about whether we regulate tech is greeted with this sense of like, whoa, 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 you're going to stifle innovation, or we're going to fall behind China, or whatever. The reality is that we're not. I think what people are trying to do is not something radical. It is just expecting of tech what we expect of every other industry that impacts our lives in the same way.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point. And so recently, I think it was a couple weeks ago, it was disclosed that OpenAI and Anthropic had both provided certain access to the federal government, to national security agencies, in terms of to assess potential national security risks from their models. And that was definitely like the good citizen thing to do. And I think it's great that they're doing that. The question is, should that be voluntary? And that's the debate. And we have, in SB 1047, one of the things that I think I probably said it 10 million times is the safety. So we're proposing you do release a huge, powerful model. You have to perform safety evaluation on it. And I want to first of all say that there are some, Anthropic in particular, who came out and said, you know what, this bill on balance is good and it's implementable, the risks are real, and Congress isn't going to do anything. And I really want to just commend Anthropic for doing that, and they took a lot of heat from others in the industry for doing it. A whole slew of AI startups came out in favor of the bill. So tech is not a monolith. And in fact, when we did polling on the bill, it pulled off the charts in the general public. It pulled higher among tech workers than among the general public. And so we know that, if you do self-regulation by any industry, there will be good actors who take safety and the public interest extremely seriously, and then there will be not good actors, and so the era of trust us needs to be over. Some of the arguments we've heard against our AI bill this year about, you're going to kill innovation, everyone's going to leave California, which is all the tech companies are going to leave California, which is the most bogus argument. It's maddening, but people sometimes fall for it. They said the same thing when we passed our data privacy law in 2018 because Congress failed to act, and they were just scraping everyone's data and misusing it. And we passed the data privacy law. I said everyone's going to leave. You're going to kill off innovation. Of course, that didn't happen. And then look what happened with social media, where we did nothing. And social media does a lot of good things, but the disinformation, the mental health issues, we did nothing, and we still have done very, very little around social media. And so the era of trust us needs to be over.
Yeah, and obviously I just want to, once again give a +1 to the point that Jonathan made around, the fact that our future should not be at the whims of individual goodwill whatsoever. But, to your point about good people inside of these companies, I think that's why it's so important. A bill like SB 1047 provides for protections for whistleblowers, who are people who've worked inside the labs, who see something has gone wrong, who want to call attention to the risks and want to use their voice freely and make sure that the dissent isn't stifled. In recent months and years, we've seen a growing cohort of whistleblowers leaving some of the top companies. First, it was Frances Haugen with Meta, and there were scores of whistleblowers who left Meta talking about the impacts on teen mental health. And now we're seeing this new generation of whistleblowers leaving some of the top labs at OpenAI and Anthropic and calling attention to some of those risks. We just saw a letter drop, a ton of whistleblowers who came out in support of SB 1047, and many of them were also employees who were still inside the labs who chose to sign anonymously, despite the fact that their employers were in opposition to the bill, specifically OpenAI. And so I think what's really important about bills like SB 1047, and I really hope this is codified federally as well, is trying to create basic legal protections for whistleblowers from these labs who are sounding the alarm and need to do so in a way that allows them to be safe from dissent. And, we saw people, for example, who were leaving OpenAI who had their equity dangled over their heads if they refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement upon exiting the company. Obviously those have since been voided, and there was a lot of controversy around that. But I think that just speaks to this larger culture of secrecy that I think bills like this one are trying to unravel piece by piece.
Well, we have no doubt, judging from the the active nature of this audience that you have questions you want to put to this panel as well. Let's see here. I think we have a couple of people who are ready with the microphones, or if not, let's see.
We can, in the meantime, if everyone has like one prediction for what could happen
Yes.
this election cycle with AI, keep it simple.
Particularly interested in the election cycle.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a second. Did we see? Yes.
I think when we have microphones,
When
that
we have
person, that
microphones,
person
yeah.
is definitely
Yes,
first.
they've got to
Yeah, there you go.
Hi.
Yeah, but yeah, for certain, like focusing again on this election, what is your biggest prediction?
Do you mean in terms of disinformation?
AI.
Yeah.
AI and disinformation?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've expressed a lot of negativity, and I can feel that wearing on all of us. But I hate to say it, but I'm gonna contribute to that further. What I'm really worried about, what I'm most worried about, is not AI disinformation at the federal level. If there's a deepfake of Kamala Harris, hugging Putin or something, the national news will expose that as a fake instantaneously. What I'm really worried about is AI disinformation in our local elections, where if there's a fake news story of your mayor hauled off in handcuffs for taking a bribe, or like I said earlier, your county elections official caught on tape at a public meeting with a hot mic saying that vote by mail ballots aren't secure. That's an environment in which, one, the public is not familiar with what their county elections official looks like, so they're going to have a harder time noticing a fake. And two, the local newspaper may have died 5 years earlier, or the local newspaper may be a shell of its former self because it was bought by a hedge fund or a chain, and now it has one reporter on City Hall. And I'm really worried about, in news deserts or near news deserts, the power of AI disinformation to impact elections at the local level. So I hate to say it, but my prediction is that there will be some of that, and that it will kind of escape unnoticed. And last thing, I know, a lot of it will happen in languages other than English, where content moderation doesn't work as well, where fact checkers aren't present, and where there's fewer news sources. There's ethnic media sources fighting the good fight, but there's fewer news sources, and a lot of that is going to skate under the radar in communities that are communicating and building community languages other than English, and I'm really worried.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, so as I said earlier, I'm not imminently worried about the impact of AI on the national election in terms of actually changing the outcomes. I think obviously there is this fear around how this could impact down ballot races and not national elections, where you will have like the AP pouncing immediately. But I think, stealing this from Jonathan, what I'm concerned about is disengagement, right? I think people being surrounded by this culture of you can't believe what you see online, there's just like distrust constantly. And I think that to an extent, that fear has almost blown past the actual current frontier of the technology in terms of what it's capable of doing. And so I would say I'm worried about disengagement. I'm worried about distrust. And I think that, I myself am going to be a first-time voter this cycle, and I think I'm coming into the election worried about that.
Well, I'm going to be a little more positive, because I think some of this is all
Please, thank you.
Real. I think that I think one of as much as we all have issues with social media and it's super addictive on so many levels, there is so much amazing content on social media, especially like on TikTok and Instagram, like just really cool videos that actually can raise engagement, and you can motivate people. I mean, obviously Taylor Swift's post was at the extreme end, but there's a lot of potential to get people more engaged. And I think I suspect we will see some really cool media created, videos, photos, whatever, that won't be malicious in any way. That'll just be sort of cool and interesting, and maybe even help people get motivated to vote. Some use of AI in politics can be, I wouldn't say like harmful, but creepy. And I think there was one example of this that I hope it was only a one-time thing. A candidate who was, they were making calls to voters as if it were that candidate. I don't think I dreamed this. I think this did maybe happen. I think it did, or it could happen. Did it happen?
It wasn't them. It was an avatar of them.
It was an avatar.
Yeah. So in India, this is really common.
Yeah.
Campaigns are just creating AI versions of the candidate so that they can go and engage with
So it's
voters.
more efficient.
Bollywood actors coming in and like personally calling you.
Yeah, so you can't you can't reach out to everyone yourself. You just have someone do it. So that's not. I mean, especially if it's disclosed as a AI, then it's not fraudulent, but it's still super creepy. And I would never ever do that. Creeps me out.
Remember that when you get a phone call from.
No, probably in 2 years, everyone will be doing it, and you'll be like, Scott Wiener said it's creepy, and now he's doing it.
So now I think for the two of you that have the microphones in hand, there's an audience member right there in the far corner. If you. Okay. Yep. We'll get to you. Don't worry. Yep. All right. So the gentleman in the white shirt with the microphone.
Great. Hi. Thank you. I'm going to just jump over the fence and ask a question. I don't know how you're going to respond to it, but are there recommendations already or recommendations forming on how credible news sources in particular, a world of journalism, but credible information sources, because the information is curated, edited, fact-checked, how do those parties use AI to amplify their current responsibilities and concerns? So this is pushing it towards a more positive future, as opposed to framing the conversation as defending against an onslaught of AI.
Are you asking the Rachels or are you asking the panel member?
Can we have the two journalists on the panel answer that question?
Sure.
I mean, I speaking for KQED, we're still in conversation. We've got working groups. We're trying to figure out what the concerns are. We're establishing guidelines for staff members. I think sort of following the counsel of an awful lot of people, good people thinking about these issues around the world, transparency is number one. Be absolutely transparent about how you're using artificial intelligence. And of course, you all probably know artificial intelligence has been around in some form for decades now. So for instance, I use Trint software to transcribe interviews. But this is nothing that would ever see the light of day in its raw form because it gets a lot of things wrong. You have to fact check. You have to make sure the name is spelled right, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not operating from a place of fear, but very reasoned caution.
I think every newsroom in the country is having similar conversations around that. And then I also think the other thing journalists are very concerned about is safeguarding against having AI replace journalists, which is a constant struggle. Not a great industry, historically speaking, recently. So there's always concerns about, having AI write stories would be something that most journalists do not want. But having it assist in reaching people or amplify messages, if there's ways to do that responsibly, I think newsrooms are interested in figuring out what that looks like. But I don't know that anybody has any examples that I've seen anyway that I think are doing that really well yet.
And there's a big split between newsrooms about the value or the wisdom of sharing your material with the big, large language models who are approaching different newsrooms. Or in the case of the New York Times is suing the companies because they're saying, you can't scrape our data. That belongs to us and the people who subscribe for the pleasure of reading that material. Associated Press just made a deal with the company saying, well, we might as well get some piece of the action if they're going to steal it. So different newsrooms are taking different approaches. We're going to have to see how it all washes out. It's very much up in the air and happening right now. I do want to make sure a microphone gets to that person in the corner who's been so way in the back, all the way in the back.
Hi, I'm in the back because I'm putting.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have. This is a question of engagement. It's come up a lot, and it's actually for everybody on the panel, which is, first of all, how much is the isolation of the pandemic kind of exacerbated the harm that AI can cause because there's this ongoing sort of lingering habit of isolation that. Kind of, even though we can still come out, there's all these strains, I think people are much more reticent to gather. And that might in some ways make it harder for information to spread about the dangers of AI, what types of things are out there, or even for people to discuss the benefits and the pluses and the minuses. And so how can actual physical engagement be an antidote for that, and how are people thinking about that? And I think that's just as legitimate for news sources as well as people who are advocating for a smarter AI policy. And also, I just wanted to say that news agencies can have their own social media presence.
Can I start? So I think you're really onto something important, and I think this is most prevalent among young people, where people who are coming of age and have come of age over the last 4 years and in kind of a critical period in your social and emotional development lived in isolation and were denied the opportunity to build bonds and so forth. And there's this increasing trend among young people to build like parasocial relationships with AI functions, right? So there are now AI girlfriend services where you can pay to have an AI girlfriend that you customize, who is a part of your life every day. You can have AI friends. There's an effort by another organization, an amazing organization run by youth, that are trying to tackle chatbot disclosures, because this is at the federal level, but because there's a way in which chatbots are now being baked into TikTok, into Snapchat, into all of these different platforms that keep you engaged, even when your friends aren't on it and your friends aren't available to talk with you, or you've run out of other content to scroll through. There's a chatbot there who can keep you company and have a conversation with you, and it's going to grow to know you over time. And there are efforts by young people to protect a younger generation from those dangers and to say, listen, if AI is being used in this chatbot, it needs to be disclosed to the person using it. And one of the antidotes to all of that is regulation and public policy. Another one is rebuilding social bonds, as you're describing. And I think an answer to everything we're talking about on this panel is getting good information from your neighbors and your friends and from trusted sources within your local community instead of relying on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, those are things that people my age are concerned about. And I think we're increasingly seeing people turning to chatbots in lieu of friends and family and mental health professionals. And the answer to that, as you said, is going to be rebuilding trust, and policy action, but also rebuilding those larger social bonds.
Okay, I'm going to give a plug for some good things happening in San Francisco now, because yes, this is an issue, and so that's why like all the great things that we're doing to bring people outside and together, and like things like First Thursdays or Bangor and Beats, which is tomorrow night downtown, and there's just a lot more happening, like gatherings in a way, which I think it's just been so healthy as we come out of the pandemic, and we need to support like nightlife and support like all the small neighborhood businesses and all the ways that people come together, because one of the psychological harms during the pandemic, yes, it was about your close family and friends, but it was also about those casual people who you don't even know their names, but they maybe they make your coffee every morning, or you just see them walking their dog, and that is part of, I think, full mental health as well. And so we need to protect the public realm and protect our neighborhood business corridors, and just get people really accustomed again to being out and about a lot, because that's a healthy part of life. And then you don't need chatbots.
Do we have more questions?
Yeah. Okay.
Hey there. My name is Emily Evans. I'm with the Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. First of all, thank you. Whoa.
Wow, look at that.
Thank you so much to everybody on the panel and everybody who put this together. What a lovely treat to have such expertise in dialogue with one another. Thank you. I wanted to speak to something that Rachel L. from The Guardian brought up, which is about amplifying some of the more positive narratives and more socially proactive aspects that AI can kind of tap into. The majority of the work that I work on is to do with elevating racial justice through artificial intelligence in regards to incarceration in California, mostly in San Quentin prison. And so I'm familiar with how AI can identify racial inequality and discrepancies, specifically in linguistic data. I'm wondering, in regards to the election and in regards to what all of you are familiar with, if you've seen any cases in which AI has actually assisted in sort of identifying discrepancies or falsehoods in information that's coming out with all of the election information and campaigns?
Okay, so I'll go first again. Sorry. Okay, so not exactly, but I do think that there is an election-related benefit to AI that we have not fully discovered, which is lowering the cost of campaigning. So I run California Common Cause. One of our bread and butter issues for generations has been to get big money out of politics, reduce the influence of big donors and special interests. And the fact of the matter is that campaigns are expensive, and they're getting more expensive every year. There are new AI tools being developed by campaign strategists and campaign consultants to automate a lot of the voter outreach, both voter slicing, so identifying which voters to target based on certain metrics, and then the actual voter targeting itself, so that you're able to reach voters with a tailored message, tailored to them, that is, in a way that is more cost efficient than ever before. Now, I would like to believe that what that will mean over time is that a city council race that currently costs $150,000 will soon cost $40,000, and you will have to fundraise less money from wealthy donors and special interests. My fear is that instead it'll just mean you get even more outreach because you can do more stuff for $150,000. But I do think that there are some benefits there. I think also potentially there are benefits around election administration, and because our county elections offices are strapped, and people like me keep passing new laws that add new things to their plate to make voting easier or voter registration easier, and they always gripe, I like what you're doing, but you didn't pay for it. How am I supposed to pay for this? Fair point. If AI can make election administration cheaper and more efficient, I think there's another benefit to our democracy, potentially.
Along those lines, as someone who has to do fundraising, in California at the state level, there's no public financing, as Jonathan knows, and we wish we could change that, but the voters banned public financing a few decades ago. I think the promised land for a lot of elected officials is having robust small donor fundraising, and unfortunately, it's sort of an elite class of elected officials and candidates who are able to really tap into small donor networks on a consistent basis, like the AOCs of the world, who are like rock stars and have just huge small donor networks. I think the more candidates that can build and have access to small donor networks, the better, because not only does that mean they're not having to rely on large donations as much, but you don't have to spend as much time, doing, calling for fundraising, and I suspect that AI could help to generate targeted universes of small donors who would like what you have to say. Because right now it's a little bit hit and miss in terms of acquiring lists, and it's just very complicated. And if you could really do it in a super targeted way, who are the 10,000 people who are going to love everything that I have to say, that will help generate more elected officials who can rely on small donor networks.
We have another question right over here, y'all.
Hi. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much for this panel. It's been so interesting and very informative. My question, well, we've already talked about how older generations are often the people who fall most victim to this disinformation. However, I found that younger generations like Gen Z, mine, and Gen Alpha often dismiss AI as an issue because the videos that we see are videos of people with maybe 6 fingers or easily identifiable, to us at least, deepfakes like the Obama video that you mentioned. And therefore it's dismissed as a threat or an issue. Do you have any one message or statistic that you can share that can help highlight the seriousness of this issue to younger generations?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I said before, I totally agree that most of what you're seeing right now is just like totally garbage, and it's just like not believable. It's very obviously fake. It's not convincing. And like I said, that's because the people creating this stuff don't really have access to the most sophisticated stuff yet. And what that means is that because, they're just using stuff that's like, 1 year, 2 years behind, you get the stuff that's like not honestly that convincing. And, video generation right now maybe hasn't caught up to where it could be. And I think the message is that this is all going to change, I deeply believe, in the next 1 or 2 years when, again, some of those models start catching up, when those stuff that's really state of the art gets in the hands of ordinary people and it's low cost and very accessible and you can distribute that at scale to a lot of people. So I think that the message I have is, I mean, obviously, it is true that a lot of what you see right now is totally garbage and there's no reason to be too freaked out about it. But that is going to change in 1 or 2 years. And so I think it's important not to get too complacent and to still have your guard up. And I think practice all of what Jonathan was saying around critically consuming information.
And just reminding people, we have human beings have this tendency to say, we'll deal with it after terrible things happen. And on the bill that we're working on together this year, we hear that a lot. We're focused, the bill focuses on truly catastrophic risks. And then we hear like, well, let's just wait until it happens for a catastrophic risk. And so,
how would we do
like,
that?
what? Yeah. So how about for a change, we actually try to get out ahead of the risk, whether it's with catastrophic risks or with the deepfakes, and try to figure it out now and educate people now before it becomes exponentially more persuasive.
Yeah, it's a classic boiling frog syndrome where like it's getting a little bit better day by day and you think it's totally fine until it just like whacks you in the face, right? And so I think we
Could
should
you make the argument, though, that people young and old are learning with the bad generative AI, with the clumsy, with the 6 fingers, with the obvious parodies, or things that don't make any sense when you give it a second thought, that we're all collectively learning how to read these deep fakes? Or do you think the companies with the technology are always going to be several steps ahead of the public?
So I think that the answer is that there are deepfakes that are sort of intentionally cartoonish because they're meant for fun and for memes. So you may have seen Donald Trump, was it Donald Trump or Elon Musk, I think, tweeted Kamala Harris wearing—
I was thinking that exact
like,
same
yeah,
one.
like communist USSR, like uniform, and it's obviously cartoonish and it looks more like Tulsi Gabbard than Kamala Harris, to be honest. But like whatever, it's meant as a joke. I mean, not a joke, but it's not meant to fool anyone into thinking Kamala Harris is actually wearing some like 1980s USSR uniform. But we haven't talked about Slovakia today, but Slovakia is the best example in which on the eve of a presidential election, the anti-Russia candidate for the Ukrainian presidency was the target of a deepfake in which he was caught on video saying that he was intending to rig the election. And he went from leading the polls to losing that election, and the pro-Russian presidential candidate won. And that was a deepfake that was not cartoonish. It was hyper-realistic. And so I think the reality is that there are some there are some generative AI models that are creating things that are fun, that are meant to be circulated on Instagram or whatever. And there's others that are not fun at all. And if we start to think, hey, this is what a deepfake looks like, it's kind of cartoony and everyone has 6 fingers, I think we're lulled into a false sense of security and not on the lookout for the real stuff.
Yeah, the one thing with younger generations too, I think to think beyond just deepfakes, I've noticed that young people are far more likely to use tools like ChatGPT, for instance, and like they're good at guessing, but they're still guessing. And so, if you're overly reliant on those sorts of tools to answer for you, and they have bad information programmed into them, that's still falling for AI generated false content. It just might not be an image that it looks kind of funky right now, but like this is across multiple different dimensions, including text.
Well, I also think that even right now, AI-generated voice is much more powerful in some ways than video. Video ultimately will be the most powerful once it's sort of perfected, but you don't have the 6 finger or foot coming out of your arm issue with voice. You can, as we heard at the beginning, you could, especially if people like just listen to things, they're not, taking a fine-tooth comb to what they're listening to. That's a bad analogy, but and so you could see in this year, actually, on the eve of election, a voicemail that, like I said at the beginning, whether it's Scott Wiener or Kamala Harris or anything, so and so, or the mayor of whatever town, a voicemail. This person left this voicemail using the N-word, and that could absolutely be effective, I think, even this year.
Did we have more questions?
Yeah, just a heads up. We have, it seems 3 more questions. We're going to start over here, and then I'll move my way over there to the left, y'all.
Hello, my name is Taylor Swift. No, it's Sean Fox. I want to pull on this thread a little bit about maybe some things that could be done with digital files. I will admit to being a software engineer, and I find this stuff fascinating, but there do exist standards for embedding metadata in images. In the old world of print, there was a standard called IPTC, which would embed things like the copyright notice and who the photographer was and the caption and all that kind of stuff, and it would travel with the file. And there are definitely sophisticated ways of putting, for decent way of describing kind of digital watermarks in any type of digital file. And I think it should be possible to be able to with a combination of technology and regulation, go to the Apples and the Googles of the world and say, look, if you're going to build a system that can display images and videos, you have to be able to respect these embedded data to be able to indicate that this is clearly generative AI, and similarly that the OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world that are producing these tools have to kind of embed these watermarks. I guess I'm asking for anybody on the panel that wants to speak to it. Do you think there's appetite and possibility for this?
Yeah, I just spent 9 months of my life working on this. So in the EU, the AI Act requires that generative AI companies embed digital provenance data metadata within the images, audio, video, and text that they create. And then the Digital Services Act requires that large online platforms read that digital metadata, indicating that the media is a deepfake, and then labeling on the social media platform for its users, this content was created via AI. That's a really simple, straightforward regulatory model that I don't think inhibits innovation. It just gives us basic transparency as users. In California, there were 2 bills this year that would have done basically the same thing. AB 3211 and SB 942. SB 942 is on the governor's desk. If the governor signs it, it will require that generative AI companies embed digital metadata in their images, audio, video, whatever, so that we will know that when a fake is a fake. And it requires that all generative AI companies create what you might call like an AI decoder, which is a portal that you can upload an image or a video to, and it will tell you if it was created by AI or if it was created authentically. So I think you're totally spot on. I think that's like an obvious next step for regulation in California.
I think do we want to try to finish 2 more questions?
Yeah, we just have time for one more question,
okay.
y'all.
One more.
I actually have 2 questions. My first question is, I'm all for regulation, but do you have any kind of proposal for how do you find the balance between open source, but also like protecting IP? I think that's really like the thing that we're not talking enough about. I think there's this issue that like, hey, I want to be open source, but I also want to have the competitive advantage of having my technology like, being ready before everyone else like sees it. So that's my first question. And kind of related to that, my second question is, do you think it's problematic the fact that right now we have just really one big company that I will not name, that is sitting on the board of a lot of like smaller AI startups, right? So do you think it's a problem?
So I can try to answer some of that, and admitting that I don't work in the industry, and so I'm somewhat limited, maybe more limited than you are. But I will say that for the largest AI companies, the largest generative AI companies, they reached a point where in order to remain competitive, they have to scrape all of the data like on the entire internet. And they're scraping data that it's not clear they have the legal right to scrape, right? And so they're violating copyright, and you made reference to this earlier, they're violating copyright laws left and right, and there's litigation now against them. You probably are familiar with the New York Times litigation, where basically if they're accountable for all the content they're scraping without the legal right to do so under existing legal regimes, they're going to owe billions of dollars to the original creators of various content, which is going to put them all out of business. And so we've created this weird situation in the industry in which these companies that, to the senator's point, have enormous potential to do good in the world, but are based on a model that effectively conflicts with all of our IP law over the course of the last several decades, and will have to continue to be in conflict with that IP law if the business model is to survive. And so what do we do with that? And it's a very hard question to answer that and to some extent is being resolved by the courts, which I don't think is a particularly good venue for that, because you have the decision being made by a single actor instead of a democratic process, and there's no guarantee whatsoever that single actor, i.e. a judge, has any sort of technical expertise that prepares them to make the right choice. And so it represents one of these situations in our democracy sometimes where there's a question is so complex that the democratic system that is meant to solve it isn't particularly well suited for the job. And I will say, this is a whole nother panel, but the elimination of Chevron deference, if anyone wants to stick around and talk about the 2024 Supreme Court term and the Loper-Bright decision in which the Chevron deference was eliminated, basically it's undercutting the administrative state and undercutting scientists and engineers and specialists who can use their role in government to make good decisions, and it's just empowering judges. So I'm not even sure I answered your question, but I said a lot of words, so thank you for your question.
Anybody else have an answer to that one?
I will just, I think that we do have a lot of work to do in terms of building the government capacity to be able to effectively and smartly regulate tech. Because right now, there aren't that many legislators who are tech experts. There are some, but that's not the most likely career path to elected office. There are fewer lawyers than there used to be, actually, believe it or not. And we also need more administrative capacity in terms of being able to have smart tech regulation. And in doing SB 1047, one of the things that real pushback we got, because we were creating sort of a not very strong, but a medium to low strength agency, and that freaked people out in the industry even more, in some ways, more so than some of the substantive standards in the bill, because they didn't have confidence that that agency would be able to get it right. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of building that capacity at the federal level and at the state level.
Thank you all so much. This was an excellent panel. And thank you to such an engaged and smart audience as well. Give a round of applause here for Jonathan. Say hi.
Please join us in thanking everybody involved in putting this evening together: The Guardian, KQED, and Live Audio and Tech Team, and the UC Berkeley Journalism School.
And also, don't forget to join KQED and the San Francisco Chronicle online for the San Francisco mayoral debate on September 19th at 7 p.m.
Thank you so much for coming.